what can you say?
People are usually on time here. They're usually a little early, and I need to be the one to say, like, oh, we're going to wait 3 more minutes because it was raining or whatever it is. But all right. Let's get display over here.
I'm going to mute myself and thank you.
All right, yeah. Good to see you.
I can't wait.
Get this display. So if you're going to New York, where in New York are you going to be?
Wherever my friend tells me to go.
Where are you flying in?
There's one he calls the beach shul and one he calls the city shul.
Where does he live? Do you know where he lives?
Flying into JFK.
So if you're...
But he lives just over on the New Jersey side.
Okay, cool.
I could look at exactly.
If you're doing JFK, you should try to go to the Ohel of the Rebbe to pray. It's a really holy site.
I'm trusting my time entirely to his hands.
So that's right near JFK. It's about 10 minutes from JFK.
What's that?
That's right near JFK, about 10 minutes from JFK. And you could just, every single Uber, everyone knows where it is. I'm sure he knows where it is. What's his name?
Justin Malkin.
Hello, welcome.
Hello. Here comes one more.
Hey, Stan.
Our other 2 are coming. And two more coming. 2 more coming. Look at that. Just late to the party. Late to the party.
All right.
A little bit late. Yeah, 5 minutes. It's fashionable.
Patty had the keys and we'd be on time.
No.
All right, well, I was running a little late because our power went off across the street, so.
I've been there and had really good stuff. I'm always spent
All right, let me just redo this.
No, I don't go to the. No, I'm not going to their tea workshops.
All right.
Bill doesn't want to do any of that. Bill didn't even want to do what he's doing right now. Bill did not want to do what he's doing right now. Yeah. He did not
Whoa.
want to do it.
Sorry, thanks. We kind of dirty, but yeah.
Oh, I understand. And he didn't do it. And he did it as a favor for him. And he can't wait to be done.
All right, let me just.
Yeah, no. He's like, he can't wait to be done. And this is what I heard from, Debbie. Because he told Debbie. I'm sure. Yeah. He's like, just.
Okay, let's go.
No, he tells Debbie. It's Wendy. Wendy, Debbie then tells me that half the stuff I want to fingers and the other half I want. Yeah, she told me she did a video and went out the chain of command properly. He just went.
Maybe she's just later than we are.
Bam, we're having a word meeting. He did not want to do it all, but she couldn't get anyone to do it. That was what he was doing.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. Small crowd tonight. That's okay. We'll make up for it tomorrow. Okay, let's get started. All right, so today's lesson is called In God We Trust. In God We Trust. It's an important lesson. Today's lesson is also about the American dream. American dream. So in the last 2 lessons, so welcome everybody, welcome everyone on Zoom and on YouTube, I guess. I don't always remember to put both classes on YouTube. I usually do put the second one on, but today I actually have this one on YouTube as well. So welcome. The last 2 lessons we talked about how a lot of the core values in the United States of America are actually traced from biblical and Jewish values. So we talked about last week, we talked about equality. The first week we talked about the covenant. This week we're going to talk about the American dream. So American dream is obviously economy based, right? The American dream has a lot to do with the economy. So let's get started right away. We're going to shift to the American economy. What does the American dream mean to you? So this is exercise 3.1, and if anyone wants to comment on that, what does the American dream mean to you? Anyone?
Opportunity.
Opportunity. We know the American dream is talked about a lot. I mean, it's always in the news and in this and that. Are people actually able to have an American dream, or they're not able to have the American dream? We're going to discover some of the core values of the American dream this week. Anyone else?
Have a fair shot in the meritocracy.
Have a fair shot. Now, I think what you're saying is that people are not limited by like their class or race or you know, they're able to go, they have a fair shot to bring out the best in themselves. Anyone else? Well, hard work. If you work hard, you'll get somewhere, you'll accomplish. In other places, you know, other countries, other societies, you know, no matter how hard you work, sometimes you're stuck in being a certain class, certain type of work, certain type of economy. All right, well, these are all true. American dream, yeah.
But I'll say it a different way. When our Israeli adopted kid came over, he had never been to the States, and we took him into Costco, he said, "Oh my God, you have so much."
Yeah, well, I guess there's a lot of freedom of opportunity. For freedom of opportunity, capitalism, you know, you're able to go and, you know, we feel that things are fair. So the roots of the American dream, so here we got the American dream is equal opportunity for all. Everybody, if you work hard and you're persistent, you can bring about the best. I mentioned a couple weeks ago that, in fact, nowadays you go to different countries, there's multiple classes and certain families, certain groups. It's almost like Play-Doh last week, right? Almost like Play-Doh. You're part of that group. Well, this is where you work. This is what you do. You know, we do have that somewhat in America. Like, you know, if you go to New York, there's high chances you'll have an Indian taxi driver and the like, right? But everyone can go, and they can go and exert themselves, put effort wherever they want. Now, the term itself was coined by American historian James Truslow Adams in 1931 during the Great Depression. And this is what he wrote. Well, Adam, if you start with text 1.
The American dream is that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. It is not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of social order, in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable, and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position.
So Adams explains that we live in a society which is structured that everyone can go, they can dream, they can fight for what they want, they can work on what they want, and this is very different than previous societies. A lot of other previous societies, you were basically born into a certain way, a certain method, and really the key word is a certain status. You were born into a certain status. In America, in the olden days, there was all sorts of levels of aristocrats and noblemen, and you were born into status. That means you had certain opportunity, and you were meant to follow that. In America, on the other hand, we all have the freedom to grow, to go the direction we want, to find the tools that we need in order to grow. Now, one of the things which is most consistent with American dream, and we always find it as a core subject throughout American history with American dream, and one of the symbols is home ownership. Home ownership. That you have opportunity to go own a home, live there, raise your family there, and
Pay the taxes.
well, we'll talk about that soon. And you know, this is actually where the discussion commonly comes in America. That, you know, a lot of times people say home ownership for certain age groups is impossible nowadays, and this is really where they discuss how can we get home ownership. Now, to truly understand the importance of home ownership in America is actually a radical idea that throughout history, actually most countries, land was owned by noblemen and people rented it, they worked for them. In Russia, we know there were always the stories of the pirates, the governors, and they were always abusing the Jewish people who rented the land. But home ownership builds a lot of different things. It brings self-sufficiency. A lot of times when you're a rabbi, I remember when I was a kid, I was in a synagogue, and he said, you know what being a rabbi is like? It's like being a pregnant lady. He said, you know why? He said, because when you're pregnant, everyone comes to you and say, oh, you're pregnant. When I was pregnant, or did you do this? Did you do that? I hear this, I hear that. So people, they always come to a rabbi with their ideas of what they want the rabbi to do, or what the synagogue to do, and this and that. And really, the rabbi is actually usually doing a lot of different things. And he's usually doing what works and what doesn't work, and he's conscious of these things. Now, when you own a house, you have self-sufficiency. You have skin in the game. You own a piece of the world. You have skin in the game in America. It's a lot easier to fight for America if you own some of America. On the other hand, if you don't own anything here, it's kind of like, oh, there's a war? Well, let's go to wherever there's no war, right? So these are important ideas: self-sufficiency, stability, and permanence. You feel that you have skin in the game. You belong here. You have a space. And, the country is going to be dependent on you. You're going to be dependent on them. And then also, you own a piece of the world. You own a piece here. You're here. You belong here. You're going to fight for here. You're going to give to society here. You want society to be good. These are all important values in the American dream and home ownership. We're going to talk about it more. Now, the founding fathers, they saw this as a form of freedom. In England, most of the land was owned by just a few noblemen, and their families would inherit it and share, and they were able to be, they were titled nobility. They were able to be somewhat abusive and basically take control of everything. They could control the economy, who works where, who lives where, etc., etc. So when they came here, they really wanted to create a society. How do you create a society? So this was an important feature which comes from Jewish origins, home ownership, and important to create a society where people have freedom, where people have responsibility, people have skin in the game. It's almost like people have membership. We're putting out our calendar in a couple weeks. People put, their birthdays and yard sites in it. So now here's how I do it usually, and you're welcome to join. We have ads from businesses, and then we have in the front, there are, people could put greetings, like they could write, Happy New Year, or God bless America, or whatever they want, not whatever, but, whatever you want within reason. And then you have birthdays and yard sites. Now, birthdays and yard sites, we always try and put in the Jewish birthdays and the Jewish yard sites. So someone will say the yard site of my grandfather is May 19th, 1962, let's say. So what I do is I go into a Jewish calendar program and I find out the Jewish date. So now they can look on the calendar and do a Jewish date. So now greetings and ads, they support the calendar, they sponsor the calendar, and we're very appreciative. But birthdays and yard sites, I always said you could stick in for free. Anyways, my first year doing it, there was a lady and she put in her brother's yard site. Now she did not know that we were going to put in the Jewish yard site. So she called up screaming. She said, you put the wrong date here, I want my money back. So I told her, well, what money? What money do you want back? Because you didn't pay for this. You didn't pay for this service, right? You didn't pay for this service, so what money do you want back? So the founding fathers also saw a similar value, where people have the ability to own land from the country, and they are able to have that land. This would give them skin in the game to decide things in the country. So we're going to go into the Jewish origin of this. And again, as we said, throughout most of history, land was passed down through nobility. So you have some serf or nobleman, and a bunch of his kids inherit it. And now all their kids inherit it. They got to act like total idiots. They get to act nasty. They're in control. We find, I know as growing up as an Orthodox Jewish child, we always heard stories from Russian history of our ancestors in Russia and Ukraine and a lot of Europe, that the Tsar would give out land essentially to his friends, to other counts from different noble families, and then they would control this land, and they would rent it out and make money, set rules, and they were always, if you hear the stories, they were always throwing people who couldn't pay the rent in pits, and it was They controlled the law, and in a certain sense, it was lawless. And this is similarly how England was as well. And it was almost like, you were hooked up with the king, you would get your land, and you can abuse the people, you can extract whatever you need for them, and that's how it was. Now, the Founding Fathers rejected that, but before we talk about the actual story, we're going to get into how this American dream is inspired by Torah. So for starters, we go back to Jewish history. We find in the Torah, we read that the Jewish people in the desert, and they're preparing to go into Israel. And what happens? You have Jews who are wealthy, Jews who are poor, but the land is divided equally amongst them. The Torah says it's divided amongst the tribes before they go into Israel. Divide then the families, and then each family amongst the people. So we'll read text 2 regarding this verse, regarding this idea. Yeah.
The total number of the children of Israel was 601,730. God said to Moses, the land is to be allotted among them as an inheritance based on the number of names. To a larger tribe, give a larger inheritance, and to a smaller tribe, a smaller one. Each should be given an inheritance according to their number.
So at the beginning of the land of Israel, the prime source of wealth that the country of Israel would have, which for most countries is land. Now it's crypto, right? But most countries is land. Now one of the things people say is crypto may go up and down, right? And stocks go up and down. But land is one of the most stable forms of wealth. I want to just note something. We spoke about Old Amsterdam and New Amsterdam. So the Rothschilds were famous for having opportunity to buy pretty much the whole New Amsterdam. Now they would own the whole New York City. And they would be by far the wealthiest people in the world, right? But they actually did not want to buy it because, as their family history has shown, land was not a worthy thing to own because you could be kicked out. You needed something to run with, right? And if you have to leave, you have to leave your land, right? You need your gold. But anyways, when they came to Israel, they took the prime source of wealth and they divided it amongst the families. Now, over time, what happens is, so everyone gets their own self-sufficient share and they get to live on their land and trade. Now, obviously, the economy doesn't always have equal effect, and some people would fall on hard times. And eventually, you fall on hard times, what do you need to do? You need to sell your land, right? So, what would happen is the Torah says the distribution of land, which would keep peace in the land, would eventually erode, and you'd eventually just go to the system of nobility and status. So to this, the Torah actually puts a guarantee, puts a safeguard. And we'll read on text 62, yes.
Are you saying there's a natural economic tendency of land holding to consolidate?
Yes.
Okay.
In other words, it would shift based on people's hard times. So here now the Torah says a very interesting thing.
The land must not be sold permanently, because the land belongs to me, and you reside in my land as sojourners. Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. If your fellow becomes poor and sells some of his inherited property, his redeemer, a relative, should come forth and redeem his relative's sale. If there is no one to redeem it for him, but he later gains sufficient means to redeem it himself, he shall calculate the value of the years for which the land had been sold and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it. He can then return to his inheritance. But if he cannot afford to repay the buyer, what was sold shall remain in the buyer's possession until the Jubilee year. Then, in the Jubilee year, the land shall revert to the possession of its ancestral owner.
So here we have, you guys know about the Great Reset? Right, we have the Jubilee year. Jubilee year. Now the idea of the Jubilee year is, number one, the Torah doesn't say you can't sell the land. It's understood that you come on hard times. If you need to eat and buy clothing or whatever needs you have, then you could sell your land. But the Torah says, well, relatives can redeem it, and obviously it's done in a fair way. And if not, every 50 years there's a land ownership reset, goes back to the families in Israel. Now this is obviously, it's not something where it's like, oh, you bought it and you didn't know about the Jubilee year. It's obviously, this is in their economy. It's obviously fair. But we see that essentially there's no such thing as truly selling land in the system. It's essentially a lease until the Jubilee year. Now every mitzvah has multiple layers of significance and meaning. But we're going to see from one of the 12th century rabbis, Rabbi Yaakov of Orleans, in the book Old Orleans in France, one of the famous Bali Tosafists in the 1100s, and he explained something very interesting about the Jubilee year. Text 4. Yes?
In the Jubilee year, did they take into account how many people had it increased, how the population increased in order to divide it up again?
They wouldn't divide it again. The idea was, so this is an interesting point. I just want to make a couple interesting points. Number one, no, they wouldn't re-divide it. It wasn't like a great reset where we're going to take everyone's wealth in the room and re-divide it. It went back to the owner or his family. So basically, like, it was understood that there's a limited amount of land in Israel, right? And we're going to keep dividing, it stays in the family. So a couple of weeks portion of Torah, typically land was inherited by sons. And we have the story of the 5 daughters who come to Moses and say, our dad died and we want to share. So Moses speaks to God and God says girls can inherit. Now here's the very interesting thing that people don't realize. What happened is the men of her tribe said now they're going to get married to someone else and our land is going to switch to new tribes. They have to marry in the tribe, right? There are 12 tribes. And then Moses says, yes, you guys got to marry into the tribe. So it wasn't fully redistributed, but the idea is it stays in your family and it divides amongst your family. Now it's interesting to note, if you are a convert, it is very difficult to buy land, right? Because it's already divided amongst the families. However, we do find that converts, that was one of the things that converts accepted upon themselves. They realized, and Jews would tell them, they'd say, we know that in Judaism, we always tell people not to convert, right? So Jews would tell them, hey, are you sure you want to convert? You're not going to get any land. And then they sometimes would convert nonetheless. And one of the most famous converts who did that was none other than Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. He wanted to go into Israel, and Moses said, but you're not going to, this is Moses, right? Moses says, you're not going to get any land if you go, And he said, come on, I don't have any connections now, right? So converts, but again, they could buy, they could do business, and they could get married into families and everything like that. But that's how the reset happened.
So he did get land, didn't he?
I don't believe so.
Ultimately, I think he did.
Well, ultimately, again, converts can buy land, they can inherit, they can get, yes.
I think the point of this question was, did every generation population increase? Even if it gets re-allotted to within each family, the subdivisions per person gets smaller, right?
Correct. The subdivisions gets smaller, and yes, initially when the land was divided, the more people they had in the tribe, the more people they had in the tribe, the more land they got. But over time, that indeed could shift. But the Torah also says, different land is fertile with different things. So sometimes you can have a lot of land, but you have the best olive trees in Israel. Yes?
So I might be jumping ahead, but how does this connect to the American ideas of 40 acres in a mule or the land rush of...
Okay, great. So let's read text 4. Text 4.
Okay.
Text 4.
Okay, God established the Jubilee laws of the return of land because people's livelihood depends on the possession of fields that generate produce. God doesn't want people to be left without a means of livelihood and therefore instituted that land cannot be sold forever.
All right, so here's what the Bechor Shor basically explains. The Torah essentially values that in a country, to have a good, peaceful, flourishing country, people must own land. People must own land. Owning land is important. Now, we always talk about different companies buying all the homes in America or things like that. That essentially would be, so what we're going to see is it's true in America there is no Jubilee year. There's no Jubilee year of it going back. And there's no guarantee that everyone will get land. But there is a system there's a lot of land and the ability to work that land for now. We haven't had to, but people do talk about the struggle that America might have if you have trillionaires that buy everything, right? People do talk about it, I think, frequently, yes.
But that's not the case. It's the government that owns most of the large swaths of land.
So these are all, we're gonna see how the founding fathers wanted it to work out and want it to work out, and then perhaps we'll see that in this lesson, and then we can talk about how things are. Okay, so anyways, with that, after the temple was destroyed, Jews lost. After the temple was destroyed, Jews lost possession of their land. The Jubilee, for a long time, there was a certain, Jews were in Israel still, and for some time they tried to establish some system in Israel, but eventually it pretty much disappeared in history of land ownership. Unless you were living in a place which was really far out, like Ash Fork, right? Where, there's no one there. So for a long time, this was actually debated, though, by philosophers as a theoretical subject. Should people own land? Should they not own land? In the 16th, 17th centuries, the non-Jewish political philosophers began to resort to the biblical model and try and understand the qualities of it. And we're going to watch a little video on the history of that.
Petrus Cannaeus was a late 16th and early 17th century Dutch Christian scholar who mastered Hebrew and studied Tanakh, Talmud, and Maimonides. He concluded that neither Athens nor Rome offered the model for an ideal society. Only the original Jewish kingdom did. In his book, The Hebrew Republic, he highlighted the Torah's law of Yovel, the Jubilee. This was a land system designed to make sure that every family retained a lasting connection to property and economic opportunity. He saw it as the answer to the growing inequality of his age, which he believed threatened political collapse. His warning was clear. When the wealthy push the poor off their lands, society creates enemies from within. The poor become desperate, the rich become resented, and eventually revolution becomes almost inevitable. Cannaeus' message was revolutionary. A society that serves only an elite will eventually fall. The Torah's land system prevented that by guaranteeing broad and lasting ownership. In 1656, the English thinker James Harrington expanded on these ideas in his book, The Commonwealth of Oceania. Harrington saw political power as flowing from economic power. In other words, whoever controls the land usually controls the government. So, if land is concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families, the result will be oligarchy and unrest. But if land is spread broadly among many small landowners, the republic remains stable. For Harrington, a strong middle class of small landowners was essential. His proposed solution was enforcing limits on landholdings. These ideas later crossed the Atlantic. John Adams, who was deeply influenced by Harrington, wrote in a letter to James Sullivan on May 26, 1776, that power always follows property. To Adams, liberty required land ownership to be accessible to many people, not just to a privileged few, because when most citizens own land, they have a stake in the system. They'll protect the laws and freedoms that protect them. But unlike the earlier writers, America's founders had the chance to actually put this ideal into practice. They considered two paths. Harrington had imagined forced limits on land accumulation, but history shows that forced redistribution can become destructive. Thomas Jefferson championed a more peaceful path, legal reforms that would gradually break up giant inherited estates. In Virginia, Jefferson helped abolish two legal tools that had kept land and power concentrated in the hands of a permanent aristocracy. One was entail. Entail prevented landowners from selling or dividing certain estates, forcing them to pass the land on intact. The other was primogeniture. Under primogeniture, the entire estate usually went to the firstborn son. Together, these laws kept giant estates locked in the hands of a few families, generation after generation. Jefferson set out to break that system. Years later, in an 1813 letter to John Adams, Jefferson explained that the laws passed after independence laid the axe to the root of pseudo-aristocracy. By ending entail primogeniture, land could be divided, inherited more broadly, sold more freely, and circulated through society. That meant more Americans could become landowners, and with land came independence, with independence came political power. Inspired by the Torah's vision of broad land distribution, these ideas helped shape what became the American dream. Real opportunity, independence earned through effort, and a future not fixed by birth. The ideal of widespread homeownership took root first and strongest in the United States, the first non-Jewish republic to weave key Torah-inspired principles into its foundation.
Pretty cool, huh? Actually, very interesting historically. Before we go on, we're not going to go through all the text in the video, but they're all here. We'll just go through them quickly. So we have on page 65. This is from Kineas, his idea of land distribution. Then we have Harrington's book, Figure 3.1, The Commonwealth of Oceania, and this was published in London, and that's where these ideas came from. Then we have the letter from John Adams to James Sullivan on text 67 and 68. So, any questions so far? All right, so you can see that they came up with their own system based on the times. They did not create a Jubilee system. It's important to note that Israel is a really small country. Israel's a really small country. But the general idea of their system is that people should have the opportunity to buy and own property and create their American dream, so to speak, and that would create a utopia where you had many people receiving, having rights, and then working together to commit the law. It's interesting nowadays. Nowadays we have all sorts of zoning laws. You're not allowed to divide properties in Prescott or whatever it is, even if there was a neighbor nearby, they wanted to give me a piece of land, but I couldn't take it because the city said all or nothing. I don't know if that was to protect these laws, but this is the general idea. You have a question?
Yeah, it sounds like the natural law concept of homesteading is in if you're actually utilizing the land or occupying it as a means of owning raw land, like in the American various land rushes, that would be a perfect way to achieve this balance of keeping land from consolidating, because you couldn't own more than you're actually utilizing. And I was wondering if Judaism is like okay with that, or has a specific.
It's interesting. It's an interesting question. I always had a hard time with understanding the biblical laws. We read the Torah. There's city property, and then there's agricultural property, and it works differently, right? Because city property is much smaller, but you have different lifestyles and values, and there are actually different laws based on that. So, it's tricky because, especially in a place like America. So in the Talmud it says that the tribe of Dan got a really bad land, and they said, "Hey, this is rocky land here. You can't grow anything," and the Talmud says that God blesses them in the Torah, that they're next to the water in the north, where the chilazin creature, which creates the blue dye, which every Jew needs to put on their tzitzis, works. And the tribe of Dan is going to have the monopoly of that business. And so they came there. It didn't matter, rocky lands. They didn't need agriculture. So, no, 100%. We see. Well, we'll talk about it in the second half. There will always be corrupt people, and there will always be people trying to take, and that's how someone asked me at the conversation at the end of this day class last year. Someone started a whole conversation about how capitalism is so great in America. And I quoted the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe who came to America. They said, "What's better, capitalism or socialism?" And he said, "Whatever is good about both of them is in the Bible, and whatever is bad about them is not." In other words, human-made ideas are imperfect, and you will always have people trying to take advantage of the system. Now, in my short lifetime, I see always there's a call for capitalism, then there's a call for socialism, and then a call for capitalism, and then a call for socialism. And that's the cycle we live in, right? That's the cycle we live in because they're both imperfect and there are always people who take advantage of the system. So socialism gives everybody equal wealth, but then there might not be any wealth left, right? Capitalism gives people opportunity, but then there might be people buying out everything and taking advantage. Ultimately, we find in the Torah that a lot of the economy was capitalistic, but there was a tremendous amount of taxes given to support the poor. You had to support the poor. You had to be giving. So we're talking about Torah system, which is God's will in Israel. Torah does not give a system for the United States, but I feel like the founding fathers, they were trying to create an idea that would work for a long time really well. And likely, as human beings, we always need to keep our hands on it and keep changing it to make sure that it's not being abused in the wrong ways. Make sense? Because there will always be people who try and abuse the system. We're really successful in the system. In the Torah, you could work really, really hard in Israel and make a lot of money. But every year you had to give your first fruit at the temple and say, this is all from God. And then you had to give this tax to the Kohanim, and this one to the Levites, and this one to the poor. This one had to be in Israel. In America, sometimes in a capitalistic system, people come and they say, you know what capitalism is? It's all me. It's all my effort. Now we know, as Jews, we know that's not going to work, right? Because it's God's, right? We know it's not going to work. But at the same time, we get to watch society learn it, and develop and figure it out. All right. Anyways, we're going to continue now. So we got the Jubilee laws, then we have Kineas, agrarian law, Harrington, power follows property, and then the founding father, champions of property rights. These are the different terms we said. Entails, land cannot be transferred out of the family's possession, and primogeniture. Inheritance always goes to the firstborn son. So they changed that, and Jefferson chose the Jubilee principle, which is essentially that people have rights to land. People have rights to land ownership. Okay, any questions? All right, easy crowd tonight. No, I know.
It'd be more difficult.
It is interesting nowadays because we live in a time that, yes, I'm a millennial, and we live at a time where people say it's really hard. Home ownership is really hard, right? Nowadays, home ownership can be extremely difficult for a lot of people, and there's that whole back and forth that I'm not going to get into tonight, but there is that whole back and forth. Okay. And then, of course, we have another discussion. Are other countries buying out land in the United States? That's another country, another discussion.
I saw a movie within the last 2 weeks, Young George Washington. Did anyone see it?
Yeah.
And it basically shows how he really came from poverty. So a lot of these things we're talking about is where everybody's entitled, not just the...
Interesting, wow.
It was really an interesting movie.
That is...
It only deals with 2 years of his life, but he's fighting to move up continuously.
Wow, well, yeah,
Came from the farm.
that's very powerful. All right, well, so now we're going to go and we're going to dig into Yovel, the Jubilee year, a little bit. As we said before, every mitzvah in Torah has multiple dimensions, many dimensions. So right now, we spoke about a dimension which I would say is pretty, we spoke about a dimension of Yovel, which is pretty logical, right? The idea of land ownership, which is connected to the Jubilee year. But now we're going to get into more of a spiritual side. Now the Chinuch, Sefer HaChinuch, was a work that we don't even know who wrote it, but it's an ancient work which is very well quoted. It was by a tremendous scholar. There are theories who wrote it. He was one of the people who counted all 613 mitzvahs, and we find in his book, mitzvah number 330, on text 8.
One of the simple reasons for this commandment is that God wanted to underline for his people the principle that everything is his, and in the end, everything will return to the one to whom he wished to give it from the outset. For the land is God, as the verse says, for all the land is mine.
So here he says another system, another reason for the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year is a reminder. It's a reminder. Who gave you the land? God. It goes back to where God wanted it. It's a reminder that, when you're working, you get onto the economy and you create power, there's always this reset notion that you have to have, that everything ultimately is decided by God, right? And this is another idea in the Jubilee year. This is very, very important in Judaism. Knowing everything belongs to God is ultimately realizing sense of humility, acceptance, which takes away greed and all other bad character traits, reminding yourself that God's in control. Now here we find another astonishing thing in the United States. I got a tzedakah box over here. Some cash in my pockets. That's cash. Okay. So we look on the currency in America, and of course it always says United States of America, sometimes Federal Reserve note. But one of the other things we have on pretty much every American currency is, in God we trust, right? In God we trust. So I got some dollar bills here.
Can I tell you something interesting about a dollar bill?
Every coin says, in God we trust. Every coin says, yeah, what do you want to say?
There's 13 of everything on the back of a dollar bill. 13 stars, 13 stripes, 13 arrows, 13 feathers.
Interesting.
13 everything for the first original 13 colonies.
That's really interesting. Well, actually in Hebrew, 13, the gematria, the numerical value of 13 is echad, which is one, which means one. But anyways, here you have, in everything you have, in God we trust. In pluribus unum is not on every form of currency, unless someone says it is. I don't think it is.
No, I was referencing the 13-1 gematria.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you have this motto, in God we trust. Now, I remember a couple years ago, actually, was here in Prescott, and I told somebody, they said, I don't believe in God or something, and I said, well, it's on your currency. And he said, that's a new thing from 1955. So I Googled online, and it says, well, actually it's from the Civil War, but it was only on paper currency since 1955. Paper currency in 1955. It was mandated to be on paper currency. So actually, it's really interesting history of it, and we're going to look into the history. The motto came during the Civil War, the coining of the motto, those words, in God we trust. They came in the Civil War. Here you have it on a penny. I have it on a quarter here. You have it on a dollar bill. And it came about during the Civil War. And let's look at the history as documented in a 2011 congressional report. This is one of the things that is sometimes challenged in the Supreme Court. So we'll read text 9.
The motto of God we trust was placed on United States coins, largely because of the increased religious sentiment existing during the Civil War. Secretary of the Treasury Solomon P. Chase received many appeals from devout persons throughout the country, urging that the United States recognize the deity on United States coins. As a result, Secretary Chase instructed James Pollock, director of the Mint at Philadelphia, to prepare a motto in a letter dated November 20th, 1861. Dear sir, no nation can be strong except the strength of God, or safe except in his defense. The trust of our people in God should be declared on our national coins. You will cause a device to be prepared without unnecessary delay, with the motto expressing in the fewest and fiercest words possible its national recognition. The Congress passed the Act of April 22nd, 1864. This legislation changed the composition of the 1 cent coin and authorized the minting of the 2 cent coin. The Mint Director was directed to develop the designs for these coins for final approval of the Secretary. In God We Trust first appeared on the 1864 2 cent coin. A law passed by the 84th Congress, Bill 84-851, and approved by the President on July 30th, 1956, the President approved a joint resolution of the 84th Congress declaring In God We Trust the national motto of the United States. In God We Trust was first used on paper money in 1957. In God We Trust was gradually included That design of all pieces and denominations of currency.
All right, so this is the history. Now, E pluribus unum is on all coins and $1 bills. But yeah, there's a lot of different stuff. And you guys know about the pyramid? I'm not going to go into that. Okay. So, all right. So here it was during the Civil War when the nation was being torn apart during the Civil War. Now, if you know a little bit of the history of the Civil War, it was interesting because both sides had their own currency, and it was only a matter of time till one of them hits extreme inflation, right? So, anyways, during that time of havoc and craziness, they decided to employ this, in God we trust, giving people hope that ultimately God is going to take us through it. Now, it's interesting to note two things about In God We Trust. Number one, the wording. It doesn't say In God We Believe, right? It doesn't say In God We Have Faith. It says In God We Trust. What is the significance of trust? And also it says, also, you know, where specifically was In God We Trust put in America? It was put on the currency to be implanted in the economy. So the Rebbe commented about these two terms, trust versus belief, and also being on the dollar bill. And if you could read, Marcia, text 10 on page 72.
The first and foremost duty is to strengthen the basis of our very existence. That basis is the foundation upon which this country was born and is stated on every dollar bill printed in the United States, USA, In God We Trust. There are various words which roughly express the same meaning as trust. For example, belief, faith. Trust, however, has a meaning which is more profound and more belief, and mere belief. Belief in a dignity does not always mean unquestioning confidence in that dignity, willingness to help a person in every facet of life. One can believe in God, but not to the extent that one puts his trust in God. As in the business world, where assets are given to another to be held in trust, so too, our faith in God must be to the extent that we trust in Him. We believe that God is not some remote being, removed and aloft from His creatures, but that every detail of our lives can be safely entrusted to God.
So here we talk about the difference between belief and trust. And this is actually very important in Jewish faith. Belief, so, you know, the Talmud says, before a thief robs somebody's home, what does he do?
He scopes it out.
He prays to God. And he said, God, let this be successful. Right? God, let this be successful. Sounds funny, but we all do that. Many of us, we believe in God, but do we always follow Him? Now, one could argue, if he really believed in God, he wouldn't steal, because God said not to steal, right? However, the Rebbe here explains that you can believe that God exists, but that doesn't mean He's relevant to your life. And it's really the same thing. You know, people all the time, they believe in God, but they don't necessarily keep kosher, right? They believe that God exists, but He doesn't really care about me, or He's not really internalized. He's not really internalized in me. Now, a lot of Torah thought is to teach us that no, if you believe in God, then you have to act like you believe in it. Now, this is very, very common. We actually believe that every Jew and every human believes in God, but a lot of times people live their life as if God is remote. If He sees distance, He's not involved in the details of life. Why would God care what I eat, right? Why would God care what I do on the Shabbat? That's where trust comes in. We need to tell the thief, it's not enough to believe in God, to know God exists, because he knows God exists, but he says, hey, how am I going to eat, right? I need to steal something. Trust means to know that God is there. God is trustworthy. You can rely on God because He's benevolent and He's involved. He's involved in your life. So if God says not to steal, if you don't steal, God will find a way to provide. That's what trust is, the difference between trust and belief. The Rebbe actually uses it. We know what's a legal trust. Anyone know what a legal trust is? A trust is, right, when you entrust a beneficiary and you make something to entrust someone else to fulfill your will. You're trusting them that they're going to listen to what you want. So this is the same thing. Our relationship with God is not just belief. Our relationship needs to be in a mode of trust, trusting God. Knowing, just like security, God's your security. If you're one of the most famous people who talk about this pretty much every page of their book is King David. King David is always talking about how he's trusting God, trusting God. So belief is abstract and it doesn't drive action. Trust is active and has unquestioning confidence. Yes.
The idea of a legal trust is like a transfer of ownership authority.
Correct. So this is similarly, that's what one is supposed to do when they're living their life. They're supposed to be like, God is the authority, God's the one who's taking care, God's the one who's in charge ultimately, right? You got the difference between belief and trust? No?
I don't know if it's completely a transfer of ownership authority. You have the authority to manage the trust, but without the concurrence of the people in the trust, you can't dismiss it.
Well, you have to follow the beneficiary has to, you have to follow the...
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so you have to follow whatever the guidelines are.
You're the executor.
You're the executor of the guidelines. So the idea of a trust is the same thing with us. In other words, in that sense, we have to be reliant on God, that God's going to take care. Now, let's get back to this thief over here. This guy's he's about to rob a house. Is he a bad person? Well, before we get to being a bad person, he probably doesn't have whatever he's trying to steal, right? He probably does not have. Because if he has it, then he's a really bad person, right? He probably doesn't have whatever he's trying to steal.
What are you trying to say about bankers?
Bankers as...
Trying to get more of what they already have?
Okay, so he probably does not have what he's trying to steal, right? Now, the same thing with...
Not that complicated.
The same thing to... okay. So now let's speak to this thief right now. Now you come to this thief and he says, "Don't you know I have a family to feed and I can't feed them?" And this guy's got enough to feed his family for 1,000 years, right? Well, that's kind of logical, right? That's kind of logical. What would we actually tell him? We would tell him, "You have to do the right thing. You have to do the right thing." Well, who's going to take care of me if I do the right thing? The answer in Judaism is God. Now, my wife teaches a class every Monday morning for women on the gates of trust. Trust is one of the most significant mitzvahs in Judaism, to learn to trust God. Now, trust God doesn't mean I believe in God. It means place your trust in God. So actually in the book, The Gates of Trust, it's a very famous medieval book from the 13th century. Fascinating book. The book, it actually says that God wants to make everybody rich and healthy. The problem is, if they become rich and healthy, who are they going to trust? Themselves. You know the feeling when there's something you don't have, and then you get it, and you're like, it's okay. You're something you don't have, God, I need money, and you get it, and you're like, it's okay, God. My heart is calm now. I have to. He said, if God would make everybody rich, what would they do? They would forget about him. They wouldn't need to trust him, right? Now, why does God not make everybody rich? Because in whatever way affluence comes, we always need to trust God. We always need to trust in God. So when you don't have anything, is everything okay?
No.
Yes, because God's going to take care of you. So there are certain people who master this. The Baal Shem Tov, the first Hasidic Rebbe, would not go to sleep with money. He didn't want any money. He would always, I have money, let me give it to charity. I'll give it out. What's going to be tomorrow? God will give me tomorrow. What do you mean? God's taking care of me. He had a very high level of trust. So this idea actually, in the Gates of Trust, it says trust means menuchas hanefesh, being able to be calm. To be truly calm, you have to trust in God, that God's going to take care. And God has to be your security. So that's what trust is. Just side note, that's what trust is. It's being able, and ultimately when somebody has equanimity and they are always trusting God and they're always calm because they always know God is in control and he's just sending them on different life missions, but God's always going to take care at the end of the day, then God says, okay, you're a good candidate to become wealthy because I know when you have it, you're going to know who it belongs to and you're going to do what he wants with it. Yes?
were you saying that like we're always seeking more riches or more health or higher status of health? Like that's a fact of life that God has engineered in?
So the idea is human beings are always worried. Human beings, the opposite of trust is worry. Opposite of trust is worry. Now, as human beings, we never lack what to worry about. We never lack what to worry about.
Losing riches or losing
We lose our riches, our health, our children, our children's health, so this house, the God, right? We never lack what to worry about. In fact, nowadays in society, a lot of people feel calm from the securities that they stored away, but there's always this level of worry that they can't get over. And a lot of times it comes out in different ways. So ultimately, it's a difficult thing. And actually in the Gates of Trust, it's like, this is like a lifetime type of journey. To get rid of worry, that's like a lifetime mission. It's not something that like one day you wake up and like, I'm done with this. A lot of times God's like, okay, what about this, Because it is very important for us in our relationship to God to have trust in God. So God is constantly testing us with trust. So a lot of times we're like, oh my gosh, finally when I have this surgery, I can relax. And then we have the surgery, and the next day it's like the stock market's like, finally we can get this down, finally I can relax. And we get to relax for a total of like 5 hours.
So God's hamster wheel.
Yeah. Essentially, God is trying to build our muscle, our trust muscle, right? That's the Jewish philosophy. This is a side note, talking about trust. God is essentially trying to bring our trust muscle. He's trying to, in Yiddish there's a word, verbreiten. He's trying to broaden. I'll tell you, as a Chabad rabbi, we are examples to people of how one is supposed to act. God tests Chabad rabbis with trust so much. But there is something amazing. We grow things that we never imagined we could grow because we are a lot of times forced to trust God in certain circumstances. We're forced to take a dive, we deep dive, and we'll go into a project without the money or without this, but we get in the situation where we have the opportunity, and what can I tell you? I go gray, but you go through and you grow in it. And then the Rebbe was like, oh, you did this project and you trusted God. Sometimes you look back, you're like, wow, I can't believe I got through that. And then the next project comes and it's quadruple times as big, and you're like, there's no way I could do this. But that's really a good thing in life, because from God's perspective, what you're doing is you're expanding your trust in Him. You're expanding your trust in Him. Anyways, we'll continue with this. So now this next section is called Trust in the Economy. So we all know that we have to trust the economy, right? No, I'm just kidding. Trust in the economy means God wants us to have trust in the realm of finances. The fact that they chose to put it in God we trust on finances shows that the Jewish approach to finances is quite similar to the American approach. In other words, they didn't choose in God we trust in sports games, right? You don't have it in God we trust in sports games. You don't have it in most places, but specifically in finances. Now, we're going to see actually this responsibility of integrating spiritual faith and trust into finances, into material dealings, is very, very central in Jewish worldview. We'll read text 11.
Want me to read?
Yeah, text 11 on page
Rabbi
73.
says, after departing from this world, when a person is brought to judgment, they are asked, did you conduct your business dealings faithfully? Did you designate times for Torah study? And did you engage in procreation? Did you await salvation?
So here's a very interesting excerpt in the Talmud. If we look in the Talmud, it says after you die, you go to the heavenly court to be judged, right? And we spoke about this exactly a year ago, what judgment is like, etc., etc. But the Talmud says you're asked a list of questions. Question number 1, did you conduct your business dealings faithfully? Number 2, did you study Torah? Number 3, did you engage in procreation? And number 4, did you wait salvation? Did you wait for the Mashiach? It's a mitzvah to wait for the Mashiach. All right, let's look at this list. Now, we know in Judaism, in the Mishnah it says, What's an important mitzvah? The most important mitzvah, which is equal to everything? Studying Torah. Studying Torah. Now you think you go up to heaven and they'd say, did you study Torah? You were alive in the world. That's such an important mitzvah. Did you study Torah? However, that is not the first question they ask. They said, Masa umatan be'emuna. Did you do business with faith in God? Business with faith in God. Now, it's interesting in the Code of Jewish Law, it says, what does it mean, business with faith in God? Business and faith in God, sometimes you're in sales. Anyone here was ever in sales? I guess I'm the only one. Oh, me? Okay. So when you're in sales, right, you have the wholesale price, and then you have the value you sell for it. So in Code of Jewish Law, this question is, were you honest in business? That's what the question is. Were you honest? This is the first question they ask you. Now, in the Code of Jewish Law, it says, for example, let's say someone comes to you and says, it's a nice class you got here. What's the wholesale price? Now, a lot of times people say the wholesale price, I'm only making $1 off this, right? So it says that's not doing it with faith. You got to be honest. You tell them the wholesale price. They don't want to buy it because you're marking it up so much. They'll buy somewhere else. God will provide for you. So the first question we're asked is, did we do business with faith in God, that God's going to provide? Now, why do we, this is really, really important. When it comes to studying Torah, it's relatively easy to come to a class, to be Jewish when you're in a Jewish surrounding, to think about God on Yom Kippur. When you're praying every day, you think about God. When you do a mitzvah, I'm doing a mitzvah for God. But sometimes when you go into business, it's survival of the fittest. This is where you got to fight. This is where the battle is. Comes the judges in heaven, and their first question is, not did you remember God when you were in synagogue? Did you remember to go to synagogue? Their question is, when you were doing business, did you remember God? Were you doing it having God in mind? Or were you doing it having your survival in mind? This is the first question they ask. Essentially, when you were doing business, did you have trust in God? That's the first question they ask. Now, we're going to go to text 12 and see an even deeper reason. Adam, back to you.
The first question we are asked when we are brought to divine judgment is specifically regarding our worldly pursuits, indicating that it is also first in importance. This seems puzzling. Our lives should have been structured such that we spend most of our time in matters of holiness, engaged in Torah study, fulfilling mitzvot, and doing divine service. Why was the world set up in such a way, and Torah endorses this, that most of our time should be spent on worldly matters? The explanation lies in the well-known concept that the purpose of creation is for God to have a dwelling place in the lower realms, even in the lowest possible place. Therefore, the primary and most significant divine service is not in matters that are inherently holy. This is the mode of service the soul operates on before and after it descends into the physical body. Rather, we spend most of our time engaged in worldly matters, as the verse states, "For 6 years you shall sow your field," Leviticus 25, verse 3. Even in the field, the lowest of places, we must integrate holiness and godliness, making it a dwelling place for God in the lower realms.
So there's a core principle in Judaism that, in fact, we were born not to be spiritual and holy, but rather to infuse the mundane with spirituality. So we study Torah, we do mitzvahs, we're Jewish, we say prayers, but the ultimate goal is not just to live in the synagogue or go to pray on Yom Kippur or on Shabbat or every day. The ultimate goal is to take that spirituality, take that holiness that our soul has and that we work on part of our day, and integrate it into the mundane worlds. Now, if your job was to be spiritual, I'd have a really good idea for you. You shouldn't have been born, because you would be much more spiritual if you didn't have all the humanistic, mortal limitations. The fact that God made us mortal humans was not because He wanted to control us, not even because He wanted to play chess with us, but He wanted to take our spiritual, infinite, holy side and use it in the world. So that's why a Jewish job is not just to study the Torah the whole day. It is also to take it and integrate it into your finances, your mortal things that you need to consume, and whatever other parts of a physical life you have. Now, which part gets to be void of God? Nothing. Nothing gets to be void of God. Everything you do is supposed to be for God, is supposed to be infused with the godly purpose. Now this is why the Talmud says business first. One might think that the purpose of my life is, hey, I was such a good Jew, look, I did this mitzvah, that mitzvah. But ultimately God, when someone passes away, God reminds them why they were born in the first place. Why do they exist? Well, they existed before they were born. But why were they born? They were born in order to make an impact on the mundane physical world with their Jewish soul, with their Jewish beliefs, with their prayers. This brings it full circle. So the American dream was inspired by the Jubilee laws, and the American economic system was inspired by the Jubilee laws, and the American dream and the American system are all tied to what's printed on all our currency, "In God we trust." The word "In God we trust" isn't just a slogan, but it's actually something we're supposed to internalize. We're supposed to trust God, especially when things get hot, when we're in business world, and we should every human is supposed to act with integrity, be trustworthy, be honest, be God-fearing, knowing that there's a judge watching over them, and that is how society is meant to thrive. So the next time you're doing business, you're handling money, if you take a moment and you remind yourself what it says "In God we trust," you can ask yourself, am I doing what God wants with this? Or am I not? How can I improve? How can I do more what God wants with this? And this is the first question our soul is asked when we come to the next world. They want to know, and they don't want to know, by the way. I just want to say, they're not asking you to answer with your words. Because if when you go to heaven and they say, did you do business with trust in God? Everyone says yes. But they want to see what you did in action. They want to see how you acted. So may we all grow in that, grow in our trust of God, and be able to transform the world.
In God we trust. 1. The American dream is rooted in the idea that anyone, regardless of their background, can achieve success through hard work and initiative. Home ownership is a key symbol of this dream, representing stability. 2. This is to maintain economic independence. 3. In the 16th and 17th centuries, European political philosophers like Petrus Cadeas and James Harrington rediscovered the Hebrew Bible as a guide for governance. They argued that a law promoting widespread land ownership was essential for a stable and free republic. 4. To facilitate widespread land ownership, the founding fathers of the United States abolished legal mechanisms that concentrated land in the hands of the aristocracy and instead promoted the free sale of land to all citizens. 5. The spiritual essence of the Jubilee Law is the understanding that God is the true owner of the land. This concept is reflected in America's national motto, "In God we trust," which expresses an unwavering belief in God's involvement in every aspect of life. 6. The true test of trust in God comes in our everyday actions, particularly in business. Conducting business with honesty, integrity, shows that our trust in God guides all areas of life, including mundane pursuits. 7. America's adoption of "In God we trust" on its currency highlights the country's embrace of fundamental Jewish values.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming tonight. I just want to mention two things. So number one, this course, of course, like the economy is always a big deal in the United States. And people are always like, this is fair, that's not fair. Well, the answer to that is in the second half of the lesson about trusting God, bringing trust of God in, right? That's the answer to the first half questions of corruption. God is obviously a very important thing. We've said that a few times in this course. Another thing, so like next week is the last lesson, and I will share the next year's lessons. Of course, JLI can't go another year without raising the prices, so we're going to try and keep it a little cheaper by we're going to offer bundle You can sign up to all 3 at the beginning of the year. You know, they raise prices, but they let us do discounts, so that's a good thing. Also, my son is putting tefillin on the first time in his life on Monday. It's 2 months before his bar mitzvah. I sent the email out today. You're welcome to come join. We're going to put tefillin on him, teach him how to put them on at 8:30 a.m. And then there'll be a little breakfast after. Traditional for him to say Hasidic discourse in Yiddish, which he memorized. And then also, I guess I'd never announced it here, but if you want to put a greeting in the calendar, or yard sites and birthdays in the calendar, or business ads in the calendar, that's encouraged. And then, any question?
Wait, about the prices going up.